This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
The WHO reports a 2.8 million COVID-19 cases all over the world in the last week, the highest seven-day surge since the pandemic began. Protests spread across the Muslim world against French President Macron, but the European leaders stand by him. And Libya's GNA authorities recover more bodies from mass graves in recaptured Tirana city. Hello and welcome to Africa Live. As always, great to have you with us. I'm Richard Nta, live in Nairobi. And for those of you joining us from across the continent and around the globe, we thank you for joining us. And tonight, I'm alongside my colleague Uche, who has our business headlines. Uche.
Thank you, Richard. And here's a look at what's coming up on Africa Live Biz. The World Trade Organization Selection Committee endorses Nigeria's Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala for the WTO top job. And South Africa proposes a freeze on all public wages for the next 3 years. Of course, all that are coming up within the program. For now, it is back to you, Richard.
Thank you so much, Uche. Once again, welcome to Africa Live. So good to have you with us. I'm Richard Nta. We start with a record spike in the coronavirus. The world has seen 2.8 million new cases in the past week. The World Health Organization reports that's the highest jump so far in a 7-day period. Europe saw the most with over 1.3 million infections. This accounts for nearly half of all cases worldwide. South Africa, Kenya, and Ethiopia saw the highest numbers in Africa, but the continent only accounted for 1% of new cases. Southeast Asia reported nearly 500,000 cases, but the region continued a 5-week trend of falling numbers. The Americas accounted for the second highest surge, with the United States, Brazil, and Argentina leading the tally. The WHO says the number of new deaths worldwide is comparable to previous weeks. And President Cyril Ramaphosa has begun a period of self-quarantine after possibly being exposed to COVID-19. A statement from the presidency says that he is not showing any symptoms and will be tested if need be. A guest at a dinner that Ramaphosa attended on Saturday tested positive for the virus. The event was a fundraising effort for the Adopt a School Foundation, which is a partner entity for the Cyril Ramaphosa Foundation. Officials have reaffirmed that the event observed measures put in place to control the spread of COVID-19. This includes screening, social distancing, and of course the wearing of masks. Meanwhile, the Algerian president, Abdelmadjid Tebboune, has been hospitalized. This comes days after he went into self-isolation after positive coronavirus cases among his aides. It has not yet been confirmed by his office what the cause of his illness is. However, the presidency says that his condition is stable and did not warrant any concern and that he was still working. Tebboune was moved on Tuesday to a specialized unit at a military hospital in the capital, Algiers, on the recommendation of his doctors. The development comes just before a critical referendum on changes to the Constitution. Elected in December, Tebboune has pushed for a new constitution that limits presidential terms and gives more powers to parliamentary and the judiciary. It will be put to a referendum on the 1st of November. The African Union has expressed concern over the growing threat to peace posed by terrorism, radicalization, as well as an influx of foreign terrorists. In its latest meeting, the AU Peace and Security Council deliberated on the impact of foreign terrorist fighters on the continent. The Security Council threatened to name and shame non-African state sponsors of terrorism. The council also called member states to destroy the financial lifelines of terrorist groups and to stop paying them ransoms. Lebanon and Israel are holding another round of talks to discuss their disputed maritime border off the Mediterranean coast. But both countries are still technically at war. But earlier this month, they held unprecedented negotiations to tackle energy exploration in the disputed area. Our correspondent Stephanie Freed has more.
Now for these maritime talks that are going forward, and there are going to be 2 sessions this week, today and then on Thursday as well. It's certainly seen as advances, and as well, I will note that there was that mass explosion in Lebanon's port in early August, and immediately following that explosion, there were whispers and hints coming out of Israel that possibly now is the time for there to be some sort of amending or coming to terms with the two sides, some sort of relations. In terms of strictly the maritime borders, I mean, you're talking about several hundred, 330 square kilometers of Mediterranean waters that are disputed between the two sides. Who has control of it? And Israel has been harvesting natural gas offshore, so that could be certainly something for Lebanon as well to get involved with. Lebanon's economy has been tanking for more than a year, so an economic boon in the form of harvesting reserves offshore, that could also certainly be a bonus for Lebanon. In terms of looking at the entire geography of the region, if the maritime borders, if that is resolved as well as land borders, and if there's a move forward, let's say toward peace, that would rearrange geographically a lot of loyalties, a lot of political interests that stretch as far as to Iran in terms of loyalties again and who's aligned with whom. But just sticking right now to the maritime borders, again, that would resolve certainly some possibly economic interest for Lebanon for right now and for the near future.
France says it will continue to fight Islamic extremism despite criticism from Turkey. Turkey is now threatening legal action against the French satirical magazine Charlie Hebdo for publishing a caricature of Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. His supporters slammed the cartoon, saying it spreads racism and hatred. Ankara is accusing Paris of pursuing an agenda against Islam. Earlier this month, French President Emmanuel Macron announced plans for tougher laws to tackle what he called Islamic extremism. Tensions escalated sharply after the murder of a French teacher last week near Paris after he had reportedly shown his students cartoons of the Prophet Muhammad. Somalis today took to the streets of Mogadishu to protest against France following President Emmanuel Macron's comments on Islam. Macron has pledged to fight Islamist separatism, which has angered the Muslim world. This follows the killing of Samuel Paty, a teacher who showed pupils cartoons of Prophet Muhammad in the class on free speech. Hundreds of mostly youthful demonstrations poured onto the streets of the capital Mogadishu to express their displeasure against France. Angry reactions continue to surge throughout the Muslim world with threats to boycott French products.
We are protesting against the French president who insulted our Prophet Muhammad, and we are marching from KM4 to Said Road and back to KM4. We are full of emotion.
Tanzania's incumbent president John Magufuli has cast his ballot at a polling station in the capital, Dodoma. He's among millions of Tanzanians that took to some 80,000 polling stations across the country on Wednesday. Voters were casting ballots to elect a president, members of parliament, and councilors. The elections have attracted 15 presidential candidates from 15 political parties. The race is tight between President Magufuli of the ruling party and Tundu Lissu from the leading opposition party. Magufuli is seeking re-election to serve his second and final 5-year term. The 60-year-old leader said he aims to complete what he describes as his agenda to make Tanzania an economic powerhouse. Meanwhile, the United Nations acting envoy for Libya says she hopes the upcoming political talks will designate a date for national elections in Libya. The talks in Tunisia follow a permanent ceasefire agreement signed last week in Geneva between Libya's two opposing sides. CGTN's Joy Karuki has more.
Libya, a North African country that has been divided between two rival factions since 2014. One based in the capital Tripoli in the west, and the other in Benghazi in the east. Now mending bridges after the Tripoli-based government of National Accord and Khalifa Haftar's Libyan National Army agreed to a truce. Previous attempts at ceasefire deals, though, have collapsed. The United Nations, which is interested in peace being restored in the restive country, is hopeful ahead of a meeting in Tunisia.
Yes, I do fully expect there to be a date designated for elections. What Libyans are skeptical about, and I agree that they have a right to be skeptical and suspicious, is yet another long transitional period. The country has been in a state of transition since 2011. What they want is a democratically elected government. They want unified institutions who are devoted to ensuring that services are provided to the Libyan people.
The political talks have already started online. The Tunis gathering is scheduled for November 9th. The UN is also agitating for a new unified leadership to oversee the election.
And what's very clear in all of the consultations that we have been doing, and we have been talking to a number of constituencies, from women to youth to the municipalities to the political forces, what resonates is a clear and direct desire for there to be elections in as rapid a time frame as possible. We also now have this announcement that was made by Mr. Siraj in the middle of September, where he has declared his desire and his intention to depart, but to turn matters over to some kind of newly constituted executive body.
Some Libyans, though, have expressed concern about the lack of inclusivity, saying the list of 75 delegates invited to the political talks is not representative.
I do hope that we hear more voices in the international community pressuring both the internal and external actors to take advantage of this very positive dynamic that has resulted from the talks in Geneva.
For Libyans, the latest truce comes as a welcome break and hope it will be lasting. Joy Kirukijuma, CGTN.
Libyan authorities have dug up 12 more bodies from 4 more unmarked graves in the city of Tirhana, southeast of the capital Tripoli. Scores of corpses have been discovered since the area was recaptured by the Government of National Accord. CGTN's Joy Karuki brings us the details.
When Turkish support helped Libya's internationally recognized Government of National Accord take back Tirhana in June, its fighters found a hospital piled with bodies. Also discovered were unmarked graves containing the bodies of those who had been declared missing. Tirhana had for years been controlled by a militia known as the Kaniyat. The Kaniyat fought alongside Khalifa Haftar's forces based in the east, rival to the GNA in the west. The GNA has issued arrest warrants for Kaniyat leaders who are now believed to be in eastern Libya.
We were in the city of Tirhana on June the 10th at Mashru al-Rabat. On that day, 10 bodies were dug out, 3 of which were in pieces and the other 7 were whole. The diggings are ongoing, of course, since receiving the call. We are working directly under the instruction of the public prosecutor.
Investigators from the GNA's Missing Persons Bureau have also been digging in areas around Tirhana. Dozens of bodies have been unearthed.
Today, on October the 27th, we specifically found 4 sites. These 4 sites had 4 bodies buried. We started working on these 4 sites. The first site had 1 body, and the second had 2 bodies. The third site had what looked like 5 to 7 bodies. We're still working on that. We're also still looking into the 4th site. Until this day, we have dug out around 95 bodies.
Prosecutors from the International Criminal Court said the mass graves discovered may be evidence of war crimes. Authorities say some of the bodies have shown signs of restraint and evidence of torture. Joy Kirukijuma, CGTN.
Beijing has again hit back at remarks made by U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, who recently referred to China as, quote, a predator during his visit to Sri Lanka. Pompeo is on a diplomatic tour of South Asia, which many analysts have seen as an anti-China campaign ahead of the U.S. elections. Here's a statement from the Chinese Foreign Ministry.
China and Sri Lanka are traditionally friendly neighbors. The two countries have developed relations based on the 5 principles of peaceful coexistence and have cooperated on the basis of equal consultations, mutual benefits and win-win results, which have brought tangible benefits to the people of the two nations. This cannot be distorted or slandered by anyone. We will continue to work with Sri Lanka to expand and deepen the strategic cooperation and partnership between the two countries.
Time now for a short break. Here's a look at what's ahead. Life must go on. How some poor estates in Kenya ensure survival despite tough economic times during the pandemic. And the story of a survivor as Africa achieves a milestone of being declared wild polio-free.
Africa is a continent of diversity, with varied climates and enchanting geography, and a people so distinct, but with a shared enduring spirit. We are at the heart of the continent to bring you the untold stories.
Let's have a look.
We celebrate Africa as it shapes its own destiny.
Tunis,
Syria,
Juba, Ethiopia, Tanzania.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
I try to not let it affect me, but there are days when it does. I'm a human being, and to see patients in a hospital bed and their family members are not there, there's no one there to hold their hand, that human touch, you know?
I just hope everyone can remember that the situation is not permanent and that everything will get better eventually.
Welcome back to Africa Live. Thanks for staying with us. To Kenya now, where the livelihoods of millions of people have been impacted by COVID-19. The situation is even worse in low-income settlements where residents live on less than $1 a day. But as CGTN's Robert Nagila reports, a system referred to as the small economy allows them to put food on the table. Let's take a look.
It's mid-morning in Kibra, Kenya's largest informal settlement. Many of its residents are casual laborers who've lost their jobs as a result of the economic downturn brought about by COVID-19.
About 250,000 people call this home. Most of them live on less than $1 a day. But despite the harsh conditions, the people here have come up with their own unique economy that gets them by.
Deep in the heart of the settlement, Lydia Sunday has come to her local shop for her weekly shopping. But this is not your average shopping trip. Known as the Kadogo economy or small economy, the principle behind it sees retailers selling goods in small quantities for as little as 5 cents.
Things like sugar and oil. The quantity depends on how much you have.
A 2011 World Bank study, however, shows low-income earners end up paying more than middle or even upper-income earners. Once her shopping's complete, she makes her way home through the narrow, muddy alleys in the settlement.
Today I bought flour for ugali and for baking, some vegetables, some soap, paraffin, sugar and bread.
The mother of 3 arrives at her one-room rented house and begins preparing lunch for the children.
I used to cook twice a day because a local school provided lunch for the children in the area. But now that schools are open, they have stopped.
Lunch today is vegetables and ugali made from maize flour and water. Up until March this year, she ran a small business but was forced to shut it because of COVID-19. She now depends on money from her family in the countryside and casual jobs within the settlement. She admits life is much tougher now than it was before the pandemic struck. But she's determined to see this period through for the sake of her children. Robert Lagila, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
Well, October is a polio awareness month, and Africa has a lot to be proud of. In the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic, it's been declared wild polio-free. Poliomyelitis is an ancient but highly infectious viral disease which mostly attacks children under 5. There's no cure, but mass immunization has brought the disease under control in Africa and elsewhere in the world. CGTN's Julie Shire reports.
Gwyneth Nkobo was one of many that fell through the cracks as South Africa worked to end poliomyelitis, a highly infectious viral disease mostly prevalent among young children.
I was born in normal like everyone. When I was 5 years old, then I started sick. It is very difficult to find a job when you are disabled. And you only live by learnership. It's only learnership if you are not educated.
Gwyneth pushed through and now works at Greenable, a company that mainly employs people with disabilities.
Yeah, my life is not that bad because it helps people with disability to be motivated to go and join another group with disability so that they can get another income which can make their life more easy.
Efforts to eradicate polio started in the 1940s after 3 devastating outbreaks. A routine vaccine was introduced in 1963. In 2006, South Africa achieved polio-free status. It was temporarily withdrawn by the World Health Organization in 2017, but has been reinstated.
So, although we are certified polio-free, we need to ensure we maintain our routine vaccination coverage as high as possible and maintain our routine surveillance, or even better, to improve the surveillance so that we're able to identify, notify, and detect any polio cases that are importation.
Africa achieved a historical milestone this year despite the battle with COVID-19. The continent is polio-free and can hold its head high after Nigeria becomes the last African country to rid itself of the disease. Julie Shire, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
Well, staying in South Africa, conservationists are trying to ward off a potential environmental disaster. Hundreds of thousands of nurdles have been washing up on Cape Town's beaches. These small plastic pellets are thought to originate from a shipping container that fell aboard more than 500 kilometers away. Here's CGTN's Travis Andrews with more in this report.
Nurdles are bead-like plastic pellets that are a raw material used to make a variety of plastic products. Over the last few days, they've been washing up on a number of South Africa's beaches. There's great concern that the nurdles, which are arriving every day, could cause significant harm to the marine environment.
I think it really is an environmental catastrophe. Every single nurdle has the potential to get stuck in the digestive tract of a fish, and they also do leak chemicals. They don't just leach chemicals, they also absorb toxic chemicals. So they really have the potential to accumulate in the food chain. So it is quite a disaster.
Members of the public as well as the shark spotters team have been collecting the nurdles around the peninsula and taking them to a central collection point. The pollution spillage is said to have originated close to the Eastern Cape, which is a busy route for heavily laden shipping liners.
The whole really southern coastline of South Africa started commenting from as far away as Plettenberg Bay, saying that there were a lot washed up there. So really it does just seem to be a widespread problem, and it just appears to be getting worse. Every single day more nurdles are coming up.
Of particular concern is the impact the nurdles could have on local fish species, who can mistake them for fish eggs or squid. They're also quite buoyant, which increases the distances they are able to travel. More than 300,000 nurdles have already been collected, but even more is thought to be out there at sea, and many are headed this way.
If you think that 1 kilo has 30,000 nurdles in it, then it's an incredible amount of nurdles that have washed up, and so it can be an incredible amount of damage that could be done.
For now, many more kilos of nurdles are arriving with every day and are being cleaned and stored so that they can eventually be quantified to assess the overall impact of this unfortunate event. Travis Andrews, CGTN, Cape Town.
China has donated 180 tons of rice to South Sudan's security sector. The South Sudanese government says the donation will be used to feed tens of thousands of soldiers in various training camps across the East African country. The 2018 South Sudan peace deal requires that all armed forces be reunified, retrained, and redeployed. The soldiers are now waiting to graduate and be redeployed. The government says the delay in completing the process is due to the COVID-19 pandemic.
So far, China has delivered all it is promised to support, to provide in-kind support for the peace process, especially the unification of army.
The people of China have stood with us in this peace process, particularly in the implementation of transitional security arrangements.
Well, tensions between China and the U.S. are at a fever pitch as the U.S. presidential elections near. But some are hoping people-to-people exchanges remain unaffected and are trying to promote them in their own way. Yang Jinghao has the story from Southwest China's Dali.
Interacting with guests from all over the world, this is the highlight of his day for Brian Lyndon. In 2006, the man from Chicago and his family settled down in this small town in southwest China's Dali, a popular city known for its natural beauty and unique bi-ethnic culture. He started a new life journey here after turning this traditional courtyard into a boutique hotel with the local government's support.
This courtyard, for me, one, it represents, I think, an architectural masterpiece of humanity, not just of China. This is a beautiful compound, and I think that I wanted to put my efforts into it to ensure that our future generations can see some of the wisdom of our past, of our ancestors.
For Lyndon, it's more than just a hotel. It's where people from different places can pay their respect to local culture while taking part in a cross-cultural dialogue.
I believe the essence of travel is culture, is people, is challenging your own intellectual beliefs, not just floating in a bathtub. 50% of the building is public space. 50%. So what that means is we have that space open to the community because we wanted to create activities, lectures, festivals that would allow us to communicate with the local people and bring our guests together, not just for them to escape to their guest rooms.
Lyndon's bond with China started in 1984 when he first came to Beijing as an exchange student. Having stayed in China for a total of 20 years, Lyndon has witnessed the nation's rapid pace of development and the country's ups and downs with the U.S. The current tensions especially upset him.
America is a better place because of these past 40 years of interaction with China. China is a better place because of this interaction. Why are we trying to stop that? I am angry that America right now is taking its lead and thinking that that no longer is a valid approach to the relationships between our two important countries. And I am not going to take that. And I am going to continue to promote the friendship that I believe is necessary and so easy between our countries.
Lyndon is now creating similar programs in different Chinese cities, though not without controversy.
Some people in America are not so positive about what I'm doing. I get some negative feedback, people saying that I am brainwashed or whatever. I am not going to be modest about my support of China. I am very proud of China. I have become a better person for it. I think that China will make so much contribution to the world.
Lyndon describes the essence of his stay in China as a bridge, even though, in his own words, it's just a little potato. Yang Jinghao, CGTN, Yunnan Province.
You are watching Africa Live. Time now for our business segment with Uche. Uche.
Thank you, Richard. And coming up on Africa Live Biz. The World Trade Organization Selection Committee endorses Nigeria's Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala for the WTO top job. And South Africa proposes a freeze on all public wages for the next 3 years.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN. Now, Nigeria's Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala has received a key endorsement from the World Trade Organization Selection Committee. Bloomberg indicates that a panel of 3 senior ambassadors told Okonjo-Iweala that she had a wide margin of support and is best poised to command a consensus from the organization's 164 members. The recommendation helps Iweala clear one of the final hurdles in the lengthy process aimed at naming the next leader of the WTO. Now, Iweala has served as Nigeria's finance minister twice, as well as managing director of the World Bank. She has also served as chair at the Global Alliance for Vaccines and Immunization. She's squaring it off with South Korea's Yoon Myung-hee. And moving to South Africa now, the country has proposed a pay freeze for the next 3 years as it plans to cut massive expenditure and rein in a soaring budget deficit. In his medium-term budget statement to Parliament earlier on Wednesday, Finance Minister Tito Mboweni said the government had not implemented the third year of the 2018 wage agreement. The budget deficit is projected at 15.7% of GDP in the current 2020-2021 fiscal year, and that's up from a 6.4% of GDP shortfall in the previous year. At the same time, the economy is seen contracting 7.8% in 2020 as public debt balloons to more than 3/4 of GDP. Now, people are now more conscious about their spending in South Africa after feeling the pinch of the COVID-19 lockdowns. Consumers who had their pockets squeezed are now reluctant to splash out on the latest fashions. For instance, here's CGTN's Julie Shire with more.
As life slowly returns to normal in South Africa, some habits are changing. Second-hand clothes are becoming trendy. And this little charity store in Durban is seeing a spike in donations and bargain buying.
With having so many donations, we're now able to sell a lot more than we were selling originally. So we've definitely noticed, people that can't afford to go and buy new outfits can come here. They can get nearly brand new outfits at half the price or even less than half the price.
Thrift stores aren't tied down to the latest fashion trends, and consumers can find just about anything they're looking for.
So you can come in at summer, you get a winter shirt or winter jacket, but more sometimes a gown that the design, maybe you'll never see the design again next year. They bring a new design. So you always find good stuff and stuff that you'll never find in a shop sometimes, but you would find it here with us.
Younger and more environmentally conscious designers who grew up on thrifting are adding it to their funky fashion lines. Streetwear fashion brand Refuse Clothing creates its collections mainly from old garments.
We went through a phase where we just only wore thrifts. Thrifts were everything. It was you wear a bougie outfit, but people don't know where you got it. And to us, how much it was never mattered because we were buying these things for close to nothing.
For me personally, it was more about I'm getting to learn more about clothes. I make clothes, so I started, touching clothes that I've never even touched before, like leather biker jackets. I've never touched it before, I've always wanted it, but then I get it close to nothing.
Thrifting could reverse the trend of fast fashion in the next 10 years if more consumers turn to sustainable fashion. Julie Shire, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
Let's head to Zimbabwe now, where the government recently authorized the resumption of intercity travel as it further opens up its economy. It is expected to yield positive results in the transport sector amid the coronavirus pandemic. Here's CGTN's Terry Wangari with more on that.
Transport operators can now breathe a sigh of relief after Zimbabwe's government lifted restrictions on travel. Passengers can now gear up for long-distance movement amid government calls for an increase in public transport.
The opening up of the intercity and the economy in general has meant that there are more passengers traveling. So that means we need more transport, public transport to be on the road. Unlike the current situation where there's shortage of transport and there is some effect with regards to the interchange of passengers between intercity and urban transport, where there are less Zupcos at urban transport and there are now more people traveling at intercity.
The government says bus operators have failed to meet the stipulated COVID-19 protocols. Operators are expected to obtain a COVID-19 compliance certificate, which requires them to have an operating address. Failure to meet the requirements has led to the rapid rise of private vehicles operating as an alternative.
Over 40,000 combis are parked, and there are over 500 to 700,000 people, including crew and other workers and dependents in the downstream industries that have been affected by the parking of those small combi vehicles. As small operators, we cannot afford that, so we need to be operating in groups. So we are now urging operators to come into groups and make sure that they get those COVID certificates as an association rather than as individuals.
The union representing operators is now lobbying the government to allow critical compliance guidelines of COVID-19 to be followed.
There's need for relaxation to make sure that everyone plays his role, at the same time making sure that the major requirements are met, which is the sanitization of passengers, the taking of temperature, the wearing of PPE by crew, and also making sure that the passengers have got the masks whilst they are in the queue or boarding or inside the vehicle. Those are the major issues that needs to be stressed upon.
Strict new operational procedures and an upgrade of terminuses are among measures being introduced to ensure the resumption of intercity bus services and prevent further spread of the coronavirus. Terry Wangari, CGTN.
And on the international front, the 5th plenary session of the 19th Central Committee of the Communist Party of China is being held in Beijing from October 26th to 29th. Now, China's 14th five-year plan is being discussed, and the term dual circulation economy has become a buzzword in China. Xia Chang takes a look at how the transforming Chinese capital market will help facilitate the new economic pattern.
The concept dual circulation economy has two equally strong components: internal circulation, the domestic economic activities, and external circulation, China's economic links with the global market. It signals that China wants to reduce the role of international trade in its economy and strengthen its domestic economy to hedge against external risks as the economic outlook outside China remains pessimistic thanks to the COVID-19 pandemic. Domestic consumption needs to play a much bigger role in driving economic growth, as it accounts for about 55% of the country's GDP. To make that happen, China will need to increase people's income and boost efficient consumer spending.
Effective and efficient capital market can help the consumers to accumulate their wealth. On the other hand, lots of technology companies, when they're running their researches and develop new softwares, but probably they need to raise funds in the capital market. So effective capital market will also help these companies to grow at a faster pace.
Capital market will be an addition to bank lending to provide enough cash and capital for Chinese companies suffering from the global economic hardship.
We expect the social financing which is included in the total aggregate financing, will continue to expand in 2021. The reason is, one is lots of companies under the economy downturn, probably they will use more market-based oriented ways to get their loans. The reason is probably when the central banks continue to putting the interest rate at the low rates, that will make their loans become cheaper. Number two is the China also continue to promote the market-oriented economy. So in that base, we expect the capital market will have more roles compared with past to support the real economy in the futures.
Economists believe the country should welcome more foreign investment, negotiate more free trade agreements, and take advantage of its free trade zones and ports. And the opening of China's stock and bond markets gives investors access to Chinese companies serving both sectors of the dual economy. Xia Cheng, CGTN, Beijing.
Now, battered by the impact of COVID-19, the airline industry is struggling to pay their staff. Some have resorted to cutting jobs now. Now, as a result, many of the affected have been forced to take their skills elsewhere. Here is Miro Liu with the details from Singapore.
Singapore started the year as an international air hub, with the Changi Airport ranked as the 7th busiest airport in the world. Since then, Changi's ranking has dropped to 58 on that list. With international travel completely disrupted and no domestic flights to cushion some of those impacts, Singapore's airline industry is struggling, forcing some of the crew members to look for other employment. A commercial pilot for almost 14 years, Kenny Tay was in the midst of changing employers when the pandemic took the world by surprise. Unable to secure the new job, Kenny turned his passion for grooming cars into a profession.
Well, the whole change in job scope has cut me back about household income of about 70%. So naturally, some things have to go. Well, you have to try to save here and there.
Kenny is not alone. With only a skeletal network in operation, the national carrier Singapore Airlines passenger carriage has declined more than 98% since the pandemic began. The airlines has decided to cut 4,300 jobs through a hiring freeze and retrenchments, as well as early retirement and voluntary release programs. To help weather this storm, airline staff unions and the National Trades Union Congress are working with other industry partners to enroll the affected workers in traineeship programs or place them in new jobs. Several businesses have also come forward to help. One of them is the international education group Eton House, which has offered to hire over 100 Singapore Airlines staff members.
The idea is that we have two tracks in this program. The first one is to become a teacher, where there's a place and train program, and there's a second track where you can work in the administration arm.
Fleur Ong is one of the beneficiaries of this program. After almost a decade as a cabin crew member, she decided to switch careers.
With my experience working with people from different countries and cultures, I think it will be beneficial to help me build positive relationships with them.
In its July report, the International Air Transport Association said that global passenger traffic is unlikely to return to normal until 2024. This uncertainty has pushed some of the airline staff to completely change careers. But there are many others like Kenny who are still longing for the day when they can soar to the skies again. Miro Liu, CGTN, Singapore.
And that is all for now on Africa Live Biz. But coming up later on Global Business Africa, South Africa's Finance Minister Tito Mboweni proposes a freeze on pay rises in his medium-term budget. We'll have the details and reactions to that speech. All that coming up top of the hour. For now, back to you, Richard.
Thank you so much, Uche. The news continues on Africa Live. We have a lot more coming your way in a few moments. Here's a look at what's ahead. China Maritime Museum receives 100 pieces of porcelain from a ship that sunk 200 years ago during the Qing Dynasty.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Kanata, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
A major donation to a museum in Shanghai. The China Maritime Museum received 100 pieces of porcelain from a merchant ship that sunk, listen to this, 200 years ago during the Qing dynasty. The artifacts are now on display to help visitors explore the history of Chinese traders.
It is one of the largest single donations the museum has received in recent years. All these white and blue relics provide tangible evidence for historians and archaeologists to study China's maritime trade in the 19th century, the maritime Silk Road route, as well as Dehua's porcelain history. Also, the museum will invite experts, shipbuilders, and other professionals to conduct research in order to build a model of the Texan.
The study of our country's maritime trade and shipbuilding history will help us present more themed exhibitions to visitors in the future. It's important to let these artifacts live again to help people get a better understanding about maritime culture.
Loaded with silk and porcelain from China, the huge ship sank in waters off Indonesia in 1822 and was salvaged by a commercial team in 1999. And artifacts from the shipwrecks were put up for auction. A private Chinese firm, Waterside Culture Group, purchased more than 100,000 pieces of the treasures from the UK in 2018. CGTN.
All right, it's time to get started and get going with your sports. Here's a peek at the headlines.